Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions. Today, Trope Talk Fridging. Now, I wasn't entirely, I know the term. I had to look it up a little bit though beforehand because I wanted to make certain that I know what this term, what this trope entails. And the definition given by Google, I felt is a little bit too broad. It's essentially maiming or killing off a character for the purpose of progressing another character's story or another character's development. Um and yes, you know it, that is what the trope is. uh but it just comes across as too broad, because when I think of fridging, as a term to be applied to writing, it I kind of think of it more as negative. Want to you don't want the audience to feel like the character is being bridged. It's like, I don't know how to word this. It's just the term comes across as negative, but then you look up the definition and it's like it's such a broad, broad definition. It's like that's going to happen in every story. Characters getting everything, essentially everything within the story is there to move a character forward down their through their development, through the plot, right? That's essentially that's all that happens in a story. So really, fridging just applies to like the basic, the story basic storytelling element, I feel like, in my head. So am I wrong? I'm probably wrong. Let's go ahead and hear what Red has to say.
This video was sponsored by World Anvil, 100% guaranteed to not do terrible things to supporting characters. I've talked about this before.
Now, of course, what I think a lot of the time when I think modern times where we apply fridging, it kind of tends to be towards underrepresented groups of people uh, in literature, in media, in stories. Like the uh I can't think of it. Like like a black character getting killed off in defense of the white lead, I think is yeah, I think that's the example I'm thinking of. That's fridging. And that is problematic fridging. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. Like trying to think of an example. In a story I wrote that will not be published, I think it was this was in the first book that I wrote. Um, how you can avoid fridging or making it feel like the character is being fridged, even though, again, as I said at the beginning, if a character getting injured, maimed, or killed, uh, for the purpose of pushing another character down their path is fridging. If we go by that broad definition as fridging, then literally every character getting hurt, maimed, injured is fridging in my eyes. Um, the way you can avoid it feeling like the problematic kind of fridging, the bad fridging, where it's just like the character didn't have right. You don't want the character getting injured or hurt to feel unnecessary or out of like left field. Um, so in the first book that I wrote, it's kind of there's a build up to a confrontation right at the end. Think somewhat Red Wedding kind of esque vibes, if we want to go Game of Thrones comparisons here. Um, and two characters get killed off in it. They get so severely injured, right? But the reason that now, of course, the main character he feels a bit like he caused their deaths, right? Because of him, they died, which there's a partial truth to it. But they fought for other reasons outside of that, and I felt I feel that throughout the story, and at the end there, when the characters were dying, um, that I made it clear enough that hey, this isn't the soul like this the main character here and him being in this area and the wider machinations going on revolving him and stuff are not why they died. It's one of the many reasons why they were killed. Um, but they also, those two characters getting eliminated uh, were needed to get eliminated by the bad guys at the end because those two characters would be a threat if they were not eliminated. Um, so, right, I think that then helps avoid fridging, where it's not like the deaths feel um, like the deaths serve multiple purposes. I think essentially what I'm trying to say here, rambling, is that to avoid this trope feeling bad, right? The bad side of this trope is, again, super broad definition that Google gave that I don't really like. I don't like broad definitions. I want specifics. Give me specificity. Anyways, um, you make it clear that there are multiple uh, reasons for that character getting hurt or killed. Um, right? Like it's the only purpose is not just to progress a different character's development in the story, but also like perhaps that character's own development, their own arc, the the goals of people injuring them, right? Perhaps it also then the injury ends up changing the goals and motivations and of the heroes. Maybe a couple people end up leaving. Well, that could also end up being fridging because you could consider taking a character out of a story. Essentially, taking a character out of the story is fridging, I think, is too. Anyways, I'm gonna stop rambling. We're gonna let Red talk.
Its own trope talk, but character deaths are a big deal. They're momentous occasions both in story and out, because not only is the character dead, which is obviously a bummer on its own, but it also means the total
Bummer,
loss
dude.
of all future potential for a given character. All their arcs, dynamics, relationships, everything, all lost in exchange for a one-shot gut punch. Now, most authors recognize that this is a hefty loss for their story, so they make damn sure the impact is worth the price. True, non-fake out main character deaths are often heroic sacrifices, protracted tragedies, or carefully woven resolutions to their arcs after all the loose ends have been tied up. They're usually given time and narrative weight to reflect this cost. The surviving characters will process their grief or
Okay, I think what she's doing here is, I mean, whoa, whoa, move my desk. Yes, all right, because she covered character deaths in a different video, and I think we watched that one. Um, she's essentially saying what I was saying here is that the death of a character uh changes the story and the survivors. Right, the sole outcome of this character's death isn't just that they are pushing one character down, like through their character development, but also, the plot, it's fundamental, things like that, which technically this fits the definition of fridge that I saw on the internet.
reflect on what the loss means to them and are often fundamentally changed by the experience, maybe carrying on their legacy, setting off on a lengthy quest for vengeance, or viewing their layered and complex life as a personal inspiration to guide their way forward. This is not that trope. Fridging is the cute shortened form of the full name of this trope, Stuffed in the Fridge, named for a now infamous issue of a Green Lantern comic where Green Lantern Kyle Rayner's girlfriend is murdered by the villain Major Force and stuffed in the fridge for him to find when he gets home. Fridging is the very specific subset of character deaths wherein a character is unceremoniously and
Okay, so all right, she's going with the definition that happens only to upset a more important character. All right, so we are establishing fridging here as uh only like serving the purpose of motivating a character down their story, or one singular character, uh, or to upset them. All right, so she's giving us a very specific definition of fridging. Thank you, Red. I shouldn't have even gone to Google for it. I shouldn't have gone to Google because Google gave me a very broad one.
And brutally killed specifically and solely for the narrative purpose of hurting another, more important character. This motivation can be Watsonian or Doyleist, as in-universe villain motivation or out-of-universe authorial intent. In Watsonian cases, the killer is specifically motivated to kill the Friggy because it'll hurt the character who cares about them. In Doyleist cases, the killer might have all kinds of personal reasons to want to unceremoniously brutalize this character, but the author's motivation in killing the character is only to make the more important character upset. The only narrative role this death plays in story is hurting a different character, and it's still framed as unceremonious and brisk. Fridging almost always refers to character deaths, but sometimes the character is instead subjected to some kind of horrible torture or fate worse than death with the same overall impact. The character that really matters isn't the one targeted for the horror, but the hero who's reacting to it. And the Friggy's personal reaction to their awful situation is usually glossed over in favor of how much that focus character suffers by proxy. Because of reasons, fridging disproportionately affects female characters, often barely developed mons or love interests whose only salient character traits are the hero likes them, so when they're brutalized or murdered, often off-screen, their more nuanced male hero fam/love interests can become deeply unhappy about it. In fact, that's a very easy litmus test to help determine if a character death constitutes fridging or not. If it could happen entirely off-screen and have just as much impact on the story, especially if it does happen off-screen, it's probably fridging. Its only narrative impact is how it bums out the more important characters, with no exploration of how it affects the character actually being brutalized or killed. Getting killed off-screen is such a dismissive fuck you to a character. There's no send-off, no admission of tragedy. The character becomes nothing more than a plot device for someone else's angst. Side character or not, nobody deserves that. Now, the off-screen test isn't quite enough to say if a death is fridging or not. See, while fridging is intended solely to upset another character, well-written character deaths almost always upset the other characters too. And since the character themselves is usually too dead to care, most of the lingering ramifications of their death only affect the other characters, typically by upsetting them. So the distinction between a fridging death and a non-fridging death isn't immediately obvious from just this definition.
Okay. Thank you, Red. Yes.
The key difference is a fridging usually makes the other characters upset briefly and shallowly, while a solid character death makes the other characters grieve. Frequently, fridged characters...
Yeah. You know, I fucking love A New Hope. Yeah. Yeah. Killing, aunt and uncle there. They got fridged. When she puts it this way, they got fridged. When she highlights it, yeah, because that reaction to Obi-Wan.
Characters are never spoken of again after the arc they died in is resolved, or even before it's resolved. Try and convince me that Luke's...
Oh my god. Yeah, Luke never talks about his aunt and uncle after.
Skywalker was still bummed about Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru 10 minutes later. So as a second fridging litmus test, I'd like to propose a corollary of the iconic sexy lamp test, which explores if a story would meaningfully change if a character was replaced with a sexy lamp. This is the property damage test. If a dead character could be replaced by someone's prized Pokemon card collection and their loss would have the same or more emotional impact on the plot, that character was probably fridged. Now, this is kind of a rarity for this show, but fridging is a bad trope. It's not a frequently misused trope or a hard-to-handle trope, it's bad writing. Character deaths are not bad trope-wise, but fridging specifically indicates a lack of respect for the fridged character and their narrative potential. Fridging weighs a character's potential worth to the story and concludes that all their future potential and growth and dynamics in the narrative are worth less than another character feeling kinda bad for a little while. This is reflected both outside of the story and in the story, since this character's killer, be it the character who kills them or the author who makes the call, demonstrably couldn't give a shit about them in their own right, instead choosing to focus entirely on how ending this character's life will make another character upset for an arc or two. Their own life and death isn't as important or deserving of focus as hurting the hero by proxy. This successfully indicates that the killer is a terrible person, but it also reflects a level of dismissiveness from the author. A love interest/beloved character can be killed or deeply hurt in a way that predominantly affects the plot by hurting another character without it feeling like fridging. This is largely a matter of the execution, pun intended. If the death is unceremonious and quick and off-screen, that's a pretty bad sign, since it doesn't really give the character their due. It doesn't highlight the tragedy of their life and potential loss, it just focuses on why and how this will make the main character sad. Every character is the hero of their own story, and if they die just to further someone else's story, it denies that character the basic dignity of being their own person who exists.
Okay, but I do think that the way in which Padme was killed does make it feel like fridging because it was Anakin doing it to her. However, Palpatine would have seen her killed anyway because she would have one her being alive uh is perhaps the biggest threat to keeping Anakin under Palpatine's control. Um uh, and her also being alive, she would be a very outspoken leader against Palpatine's regime, and she's a likable politician within universe. So now, of course, all of this is thinking deeper into the media, perhaps than what was given to us in the movies. I do think George did a poor job at showing Padme's popularity outside of her relationship to Anakin, right? Clone Wars did a better job at showing that a bit. Um, and then, I think it got expanded upon in uh, The Lost Tales. Is that what it's called? No, The Jedi Tales. The mini series, the season one that they did, where it followed Ahsoka and Count Dooku stories. Dooku's fall to the dark side, and Ahsoka after she left the Order, and then post Ahsoka, like immediately post Order 66, and she's like hanging out at Padme's funeral or whatever. Um, those two, I think, have the Clone Wars TV show, and then uh, they that really fleshed out Padme's character, and I feel like has made me biased in thinking that her death in the Revenge of the Sith is not a fridge because it was posthumously fixed. I think definitely if you just go off of the original three movies, it definitely feels like a fridge. I still think that even off of the three movies, you could potentially insinuate that Padme would get killed by Palpatine. Like Padme's death serves a purpose outside of making Anakin go dark, go bad, and become stay with Palpatine. I think her death, helps ensure Palpatine's control over the wider galaxy because she would have been a very outspoken anti-Palps person.
Is more than just a prop in someone else's life. It takes their death and the loss of their entire future life and minimizes it down into a short, brief emotional impact on another character. It's dismissive. Now, we're about to enter the spicy take zone because, the MCU is my old favorite punching bag, but personally, this is how I felt about most of the major character permadeaths in Infinity War and Endgame, especially.
Yeah, in Endgame, yes. In Infinity War, it could have been really good, but because of Endgame, it retroactively does make a lot of the deaths in Infinity War not hit as hard.
Especially Gamora and Black Widow. Loki and Vision do die fairly quickly and unceremoniously, primarily to hurt the characters invested in them, but they're given narrative weight and some dignity in the process. It feels unfair and tragic in universe that they couldn't be saved, rather than feeling like bad writing. But Gamora.
Yep. Infinity War, I think, is fantastic. Endgame is where they drop the ball, right? And I think part of the reason why Endgame does drop the ball is because Infinity War set the table so high. They knocked it out of the park with Infinity War. And Endgame, they just had to bring everyone together somehow. Uh, right? And, part of the problem is the plot that they essentially were building up to with Infinity War. They had to think of some, like, I don't think I could have thought of something better in place of what was seen in Endgame. I don't know really. I'm not quite sure what I would have done differently. I'd have to think a lot on it, but I don't think I would have done really better than what was there. That they had a very tough task with Endgame, and they needed to, kill off characters for, other purposes, right? Uh, No, it was if we look at it out of universe and look at it from our universe, it was time to let Robert Downey Jr. go as Iron Man. It was time to let uh uh, Chris Evans go as Captain America. I think it was time for Black Widow to go. Hulk probably should have gone as well because they've just done a terrible job with developing the Hulk throughout the MCU. I feel like they've done a terrible job. I think they're trying to retroactively fix that now, but it feels a little too late in my eyes. So yeah, I'm gonna sneeze. Dude, allergies have been fucking me up, guys. Hopefully you can't hear my sniffling too bad. I just took some nasal spray. Hopefully that helps. I took an allergy medicine this morning when I woke up, and it has not been helping. So I'm a fucking mouth breather right now.
Well, it's actually kind of fascinating. In the 2 movies she'd been in, her entire arc had centered on escaping Thanos and his deeply fucked up abusive parenting situation, healing and growing as a person, and learning to trust and even love her new friends. Her dynamic with Nebula was following that same track, realizing they weren't enemies but victims of the same terrible situation and the same manipulative, tortuous narcissist. Thanos' shadow.
I'm gonna say it. I didn't really care for Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2. I didn't really laugh. I just, they were okay. I'd probably rank them below average or average at the most. I don't think James Gunn is my style, honestly.
Shadow looms large over Gamora's arc as the root cause of all the pain and suffering in her life, and the thing that scares her most that she's constantly fighting to escape. In Infinity War, Thanos is told by Red Skull that in order to get the Soul Stone, he has to sacrifice something he loves. So he kills Gamora, like permanently. She's dead. Now that's bad enough. It's worse that it works. Gamora believes that Thanos is incapable of love, and quite frankly, by every indication, she's right. He's a raging
Yeah.
narcissist who can't see past his own chins, and this should have been the test of character that screwed him over. And also, like, you must kill your loved ones to get this powerful MacGuffin and become strong is like baby's first obvious secret test of moral character, and it's frankly criminal that killing your loved ones was actually the only way to get the stone. That's just lazy writing. Like, you had the grimdark option and you had the actually interesting option, and you picked grimdark because you thought grimdark was automatically more interesting. That's just disappointing. Anyway, but it'd be bad enough if they just undercut Gamora's whole personal arc by saying that the irredeemably evil overarching supervillain who slaughtered her people and tortured her and Nebula for decades actually truly loved her all along. It crosses the line twice by having him prove that he loved her by murdering her. Gamora's
Yeah.
entire arc and place in the narrative is undercut and sacrificed to give Thanos a character trait that makes no sense for him, and to make Star-Lord sad so he acts dumb in the finale. Oh, and to make Thanos sad, which
Yeah, this is a good point against Infinity War. Like this one, in this instance, uh, over like outside of this, Infinity War is fantastic, but in this particular instance, this is a very glaring issue inside of the movie and the plot. It's very much plot needs to happen. They couldn't think of any other way. Perhaps maybe they were trying to brainstorm some other ideas, but ultimately, you know how Hollywood works. They got to get the movie made, so they don't have, you know, unlimited time to think up all of these things, and and write multiple scripts for it. They can write multiple scripts, but ultimately they are still limited in time, and they need to get the movie out there. So I'm going to be more forgiving, especially I'm also going to be forgiving on the MCU with its scripts because of how, like, I don't know what the process is like internally, but based on the speed in which they've had movies coming out, TV shows, they probably do not give script writers maybe more than 2 or 3 years to write something at the most, uh, to get that final product there. They probably, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they get a team together and then the team is told you have a year to get a final script in our hands, and then we're making the movie. I would not be surprised if that was the process, for the MCU. Uh, so yeah. Now, of course, this is me just speculating based on things and a little bit of what I've heard about in the industry and how things go. Yeah. I was gonna say something that didn't. What? There was another thing I wanted to say in regard that was actually related to in universe in the MCU. I can't remember what it was. I'm blanking.
Which is
Move
given
on.
more focus and weight than Star-Lord being sad. Because obviously, making the pure evil villain kinda bummed out was worth the cost of one of Marvel's most interesting heroines. Like, I see what they were
Oh, I remember. In Endgame, what's actually interesting is that whereas this moment felt like fridging, in Infinity War, the fight between Natasha and Hawkeye did not feel like fridging because they're both fighting each other to sacrifice themselves, um, because neither of them want to let the other person die. I thought that was well done. I still think ultimately Natasha Black Widow could have been given a overall better death than that, especially when it's like comparing her versus Hawkeye. It's like the audience would prefer Hawkeye to die, which, is a little fucked up, but yeah, um I think yeah,
were going
I can't
for,
think of
but
other words.
it didn't work well. It was a bad idea, and it completely undercut everything Gamora had had in the previous movies, which is very disappointing. Meanwhile, Black Widow's death is similar to Gamora's, but is bad for different reasons, because unlike Gamora, who had too much character weight and potential to warrant her unceremonious death, Black Widow was completely underutilized by every other movie she's been in with the arguable exception of Winter Soldier. We had this franchise for a decade, and we never got an arc for Widow that was deeper than she's hot or she's boning the Hulk. This made her narratively disposable, but you can tell that the writers realized she was too disposable for it to be impactful, because for the first half of Endgame, they speedrun the whole characterization process by suddenly giving her some character focus, a dynamic with the other heroes, and an alleged
Yep.
personal arc about treasuring the Avengers as a found family all along. It was an attempt to make up for lost time, so we
I do think she got good character exploration in like she said, Winter Soldier definitely helped her out a lot. But also Civil War, she got a little bit, not as much as Winter Soldier, but like her relationship with Cap was always very interesting to me. And also I was very much a supporter that like she would have been the reason why Cap doesn't want to go in the past. I disagree with the decision for Cap to go into the past. I thought that was stupid. They either should have killed him off, or maybe he takes on more of a mentor role to younger generations or something. Maybe he's tired of actively fighting or something. I don't know. But him fucking off to a universe and going to an alternate timeline and going back in time does not fit who he is, in my opinion. Um, so, goddamn, my nose, dude. Um, I definitely think Black Widow and Captain America should have ended up together in the MCU. Um, that's my ship there. But yeah. And also the Black Widow movie should have been made before Infinity War. I I enjoyed the Black Widow movie. I thought it was okay. It wasn't bad. Uh, there were some moments where I'm like, meh. But I think a lot of it had some good concepts within it. I especially like the concept behind the actual villain in Black Widow. I thought that was really well done. Just not as well executed as it could have been.
be sold on her heroic sacrifice, but it was clearly token. The fact that the movie completely stopped acknowledging her death 5 minutes after they got back is really just kind of indicative of how little she actually mattered. Tony's
Yeah.
heroic sacrifice got every hero in the MCU paying their respects, a protracted funeral scene, and an entire movie about how hard it is for the MCU to
Yeah.
move on without him. Tasha got a bench in a lake and a solo movie a year and a half after she died. If we were supposed to believe she really mattered, the story should have acted like it. And it should have acted like it for longer than just like the hour-long wind-up to her dying to advance the plot for stupid, contrived reasons. Was she just getting too expensive? Is that what the problem was? I mean, come on, guys. And it's kind of telling that the MCU has rolled back or undercut all 4 of those deaths in one way or another. Loki and Gamora have time-displaced versions with 0 character development running around to replace their more interesting dead versions. Vision
Yeah.
got an actual proper send-off in WandaVision, and Wanda got to actually grieve, plus he's got his own not quite the same copy running around now for future appearances. And of course, Black Widow is finally getting that solo movie we were promised, which is a damn hard sell at this point now that she's already dead and thus frankly irrelevant. If the deaths
Yeah.
had been properly impactful and narratively worth the cost, none of this rollback would have been necessary. Now, in fairness, the fact of the matter is that characters are not real people. Characters are parts of a story and they exist to further a narrative, and some of them really are just props in other characters' lives. And that's not a morally bad thing. But the story probably shouldn't make you think that. Sure, we, the audience, may be able to guess that the hero's small, peaceful town and stern but fair father figure just exists to get torched by the Dark Lord in episode 1 to set up the inciting incident and set them on the hero's journey, but the hero doesn't know that, and that's what's supposed to be important about this. To the hero, that's their whole world. Torching that town and icing that father figure off screen just tells the audience that the hero might theoretically care, but we don't have to, and the story won't really convince you that the hero does care. It disconnects us from someone we're supposed to be relating to, and it undercuts the emotional impact of the death when the emotional impact of the death is the only thing this trope has. Now, if the father figure had been with us for, say, 2 seasons, or the first act or 2 of a movie, serving as a mentor figure for instance, we would expect him to die with some fanfare, and we'd be weirded out and upset if he didn't. A heroic sacrifice, a dying monologue, an admission that the hero made him a better man and so very proud, several references to him after he dies so we remember how he affected the hero's journey. If we didn't get that kind of thing, we'd feel cheated. But just because we, the audience, haven't seen the Chapter 1 dead dad for very long, the author feels comfortable just torching the place off screen after a single expository line of dialogue and then expects us to feel for the hero when the story hasn't made this death feel meaningful. In this structure, the amount of weight a character death is given is not proportionate to how important the character is, it's proportional to how much screen time the character was given, which has nothing to do with how the characters should be reacting to this loss. Fridging is a very disliked trope for several reasons. For one thing, you'll be hard-pressed to find a heroic death trope that people like. Heroic sacrifices are basically the only one that's even halfway appreciated, since for the most part, killing a character is gonna feel bad. But more importantly, fridging lacks the counterbalancing qualities that can make a character death feel satisfying or earned. A hero might die gallantly defending their loved ones, which is heartwarmingly heroic with an element of free will and choice, or fully at peace with their fate, making their death a natural conclusion to their arc, or with some other caveat that makes the audience believe that their death works to end their personal arc. And if their death is tragic,
and then they bring Palpatine back. Sequel trilogy is so bad.
And unfair, it'll often be tortuously prolonged to really drive home to the audience that, yeah, sorry, it's not a fluke or a fake out, the character isn't making it through this one. For a classic Fullmetal Alchemist example, spoiler alert, Maze Hughes, professional funny man and sweetheart, is unexpectedly killed fairly early in the series because he figured out the overarching plot way too early, so the villains needed him out of the way. His death serves as a major motivation for most of the heroes, most notably Roy Mustang, but it's not just a token heroic motivator to get the protagonists in gear. It feels awful. It's tragic, it's unfair, he fights very hard to stop it from happening, his wife and daughter are devastated, and the ramifications are felt all the way up to the finale. This death would not work the same if it happened off screen, and it could not be replaced by a binder of Pokemon cards. It means too much to the story, so it's not fridging. Fridged characters do not get this kind of treatment, and frankly, they're lucky if they get personal arcs at all. They die only to make another, more important character feel sad or mad. It's not a heroic sacrifice, they have no agency in it, they're not at peace with it, and their personal arcs, if they get them, aren't neatly resolved in time for it. Their death or brutalization is cruel and unfair because it's designed to feel cruel and unfair to the character they're supposed to hurt or motivate, but as a result, it undercuts the only semi-okay parts of character deaths and just makes the experience relentlessly unpleasant and catharsis-free for the audience. Now, this is not a mistake. This is an intentional part of the trope, because it essentially sets up an unstable narrative situation the protagonist must now work to stabilize and resolve, usually by hunting down and stopping the killer. This is a motivation that starts an arc, so it's not meant to feel like an arc resolution, which is often the only part of a character death the audience halfway appreciates. But it betrays a fundamental dismissal of the fridged character, which undercuts the very emotional impact they're trying to invoke. As an example, when Alan Moore wrote The Killing Joke, Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, is shot, paralyzed, and brutalized by the Joker, entirely to upset Jim Gordon and Batman and kick off one last terrible joke. She's not even killed, but how this traumatic event affects her is entirely glossed over in story. In fact, all she says to Batman afterwards from her hospital bed is how worried she is about what the Joker's gonna do to her dad. It's heroic of her to be concerned, but that's not why her reaction was written that way. Barbara didn't matter to this story. Alan Moore has actually said he kinda regrets treating her that way. He thinks his editor probably should have reined him in instead of responding with, and I am apparently quoting, "Yeah, okay, cripple the bitch." That
Whoa! Whoa! Whoa.
Fundamental dismissiveness on the part of the creator really does drive home that fridging is a fundamentally broken trope. If the author doesn't care about the character enough to give their pain narrative weight, they'll have a very hard time convincing the audience to care when they suffer. The only way the author can make the audience care in this situation is by making this unimportant death hurt another, more important character. But since the author doesn't care about the fridged character, they'll have a hard time writing the more important character's reaction to their fridging. The more important character cares more about the fridged character than the author does, so how is the author supposed to write their grief when they clearly can't even imagine it? It comes across as shallow and hollow because on a very real level it is. A fridging isn't just lacking in resolution, it's usually lacking in real emotional weight. We're lucky if we really know the character who dies, and if we don't, then killing them only affects us by how it affects the characters who care about them, and only if we care about those characters in turn. Killing off a character we're not invested in tells us that character was never going to matter on their own merit, which can disengage the audience from the story as a whole. So opening a story by fridging someone sends a pretty clear message to the audience that most characters don't matter, which speedruns the disengaged audience problem right out of the gate. Fun fact, this is how Supernatural begins. I tried watching it way back when and lost interest after the first season or so, but I remember the pilot because it's burned into my brain. Even at the time, I could kind of tell the writing wasn't working. First scene, we meet our protagonists as young children in an idyllic home with their father and mother. Smash cut to the night, their father wakes up to see his wife stuck to the ceiling with a horrified expression. Then she explodes and the house burns down. Smash cut to the main plot, it's a couple decades later, brother 1 is in college and has a girlfriend, brother 2 shows up and tries to give him a call to adventure to make the actual plot happen. Brother 1 is reluctant because he's got so
God, they're so young.
much going on for him in his personal life right now. Then brother 1's girlfriend gets stuck to the ceiling and explodes, so it's time for a road trip. The
God, those graphics are so bad. Woo. Early 2000s, baby.
first time it happened, it was kinda spooky. The second time it happened, I actually laughed. I looked this up to make sure I was remembering the details right, and apparently, in the plot, both of these women were killed specifically because the bad guy had plans for the protagonist, and in the case of the girlfriend, he's the one who introduced them in the first place, specifically so he could manipulate the protagonist by killing her. That's just, God, that's so funny. That's the pilot. No wonder death is meaningless in this show. So, fridging tries to have things both ways. It gives us a character who clearly doesn't matter on their own, and then kills them in a way that highlights that they didn't matter to the story by their own merit, but then tries to tell us that their death really, really mattered to the character we're supposed to sympathize with. It's like the worst kind of damsel in distress, a character in trouble whose only trait we're given to care about is that they're in trouble. It's almost the epitome of tell don't show. If we don't care about the character and they die quickly and unceremoniously, we never have a reason to care. If we do care about the character and they die quickly and unceremoniously, and all we focus on is how bad that makes someone else feel, it feels like a bad use of their potential and it makes us aware of the hand of the author, which is never a good thing. Now, some authors recognize this without really recognizing the problem, and will try to play it one of two ways. In one school of thought, the soon-to-be fridged character will suddenly be given an unprecedented amount of on-screen focus and a handful of purposefully heartwarming or cute character traits to quickly get the audience invested in this hitherto non-character so it feels halfway momentous when they die. I like to call this the Whedon school of fridging, or the Coulson effect. This is the author's attempt to speedrun the getting the audience invested process without having to actually make the character stand on their own, or, matter. And on the flip side, sometimes a fridged character will give some kind of token justification for why their death is okay actually, usually along the lines of, I'm at peace now, or I already have everything I wanted, or the real treasure was our friendship, or something. This is an attempt to kludge together a satisfying character resolution so it doesn't feel completely unceremonious, but it suffers from the fact that the fridged character definitely didn't have an arc leading up to it. It doesn't fully counterbalance the disengaging gut punch of an unceremonious character death because it feels token and disconnected. If the character's arc was really resolved, we probably shouldn't need to hear them say it out loud seconds before they die. It's like how we shouldn't need to hear the characters say I love you to know they're in love, you know? I love you shouldn't be a surprise to the audience, and neither should I'm totes cool with death now. Both just end up feeling like a way to compensate for inadequate writing last minute. You may recall, Black Widow's death in Endgame did both of these things, and it was bad because neither of these writing tricks make up for wasted character potential. Avoiding fridging is a matter of giving the character their narrative due. It's about treating them like they really are.
And then, of course, right, I think we got to be a bit lenient on Endgame there, though, and their treatment of Black Widow, because they aren't the right, right, I mean, the writers of Black Widow, of Endgame, were the ones that gave Black Widow more screen time in Winter Soldier, if I'm remembering right. I think it's the same directors and writers. So, you know, it isn't their fault that the rest of the MCU essentially sidelined her. They put in some work, and then no one else really took up on it in the other movies. They were like the only ones using Black Widow. in their movies. So, all right, she was there in Winter Soldier, then she was there in Civil War. She was not in any others until like Infinity War, right? Before then, it was she in Iron Man 3 at all? I don't remember, but right, like her characterization in Iron Man, the first two Avengers movies, terrible, absolutely terrible. And of course, the first two Avengers movies were written by Joss Whedon, right? Second was fucking Evil Robot written by Joss Whedon? I think so. Uh, so I can't be too like I'm harsh on Endgame. I think it could have been written a whole lot better. I don't know how you would have written it better, but because I haven't thought that hard on it. But I have a lot of problems with Endgame. However, in this situation with her death, with Black Widow's death, they making it impactful now, of course, because of the fact of the previous MCU movies and their treatment of Black Widow. Perhaps that then makes a case that for you shouldn't kill her because the audience is not in love with her, right? That her death would not be impactful. That argument I would understand. That would be a very good argument for like, hey, don't kill her then if she isn't, if this is going if her death is going to feel like a fridge, then don't kill her, right? Good point. Uh I was thinking they were going to kill Thor, and I think honestly probably should have. They probably should have killed the original 3. I think killing off the original 3 would have been hell, fucking kill Hulk too. The original 4, kill them off. I think would have been a good thing to do for the MCU as a whole to move forward, and also take out their heavy hitters, right? Because Thor still being alive, kind of, he's like fucking strong as fuck, and same with Hulk. Hulk is now wicked strong and wicked smart, right? Like the threats, I don't know. It's harder to make the threats feel like a threat when you still have Thor and Hulk moving around. So, anyways,
Are the hero of their own story and writing their death or brutalization as if that's where the story actually ends. How much more impactful would a fridging be if the story actually acted like an important story was ending with their death? And how many riots would there be if an actually important main character was iced as unceremoniously as these fridging victims are? If Captain America had gone over that cliff with a token little half smile and an I'm at peace now, there would have been fucking riots in the streets, and you know it. I guess this
yeah,
is just another trope that boils down to it's better to write actual characters with agency and personal goals instead of people-shaped plot devices. It's funny how often that happens. So, yeah, and thanks again to
and that was Trope Talk, bridging by Overly Sarcastic Productions. I'm sorry about my nose here. It sucks. I hate allergies. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.